meeting. So welcome to us that are here so far. And at the last meeting, we discussed ways in which we work with our paralegals. So we shared our model on paralegal supervision. And this week, we're diving deeper into what we do. And it's just a conversation. So there are no presentations or anything. It's just a discussion on how we support our paralegals in the work that they do, and how much leeway, I guess we want to say, do we give them in their work. So it's just a discussion, and anybody is free to share in terms of with our paralegals, like who really owns the cases, how much who really owns the cases, and how much support do they get? So like, who has more ownership? How do paralegals really feel that they have a strong buy-in, or is it more of like a top-down approach? We sort of dictate how they carry out their work, or do we give them much more leeway in doing it? So whoever wants to discuss, to start, can go first.
I had a clarification on the first question. I'm seeking clarification on the first question. When we say owns, what do you mean owns the case? Maybe
when we say who owns the case, like the paralegals, like are they able to go forward with working on their cases, or do they have to check in with us before they can proceed? Like how much of, I don't know, the word's just, I'm sort of losing the word, but how much of the process do they own in terms of proceeding on a case?
Maybe I would add to that.
Yeah.
Maybe I'd add to that question, because I think somehow it's often a little bit easier to think about like specific instances. So I think, Amina, you pointed out, like, this idea of permission or consent to take steps in a case or something like that. With the supporting NGO or supervising attorneys or otherwise. I think another way to look at it would be, say a paralegal no longer works with a particular organization, is moving on. What happens to the case? And that's another way to look at, like, who owns the case. Like, does the case then get handed over to another paralegal, or who has ultimate responsibility for the case being handled? Or does it just, like that, the paralegal leaves and the case just disappears, finish? I don't know. I think that's like, who holds that responsibility is, I think, a piece of the question as well.
Especially in a case, in this case, a paralegal has been employed by the organization, or is just, one of the community-based paralegals who gets on and off support from the organization itself.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that there's a whole spectrum, right? I mean, it's not like not like A or B. It's like, I think there are some models where paralegals are staff members of organizations, and often those models are, and then there's other models where it's very, very loose in terms of an association between the paralegal and the NGO, and then there's all of the other. I think probably if I reflect on JEI's model, I think we're somewhere in the middle. I don't know where on that spectrum. Certainly our paralegals are not staff, very far from that. But certainly there's a strong association with JEI, and we, for instance, we take responsibility for cases. Like, if a case is not moving forward because a paralegal is unavailable, all of our paralegals do other things, right? They have a shop, or they are a school teacher, or they, we say that we have the responsibility to the client to make sure that the case moves and that the client gets resolution, even if their paralegal handling the case goes to school and is no longer available or otherwise. So again, I don't know where we are on that spectrum. Probably forever shifting in some ways, like probably not very stationary, but somewhere in that middle part.
Yeah, I think it's the same for us as well, because our paralegals are not staff. They're community-based paralegals, and normally it's because we've taken them on or we train them initially to work on a particular project. But then once the project is ended, we have tended to continue to work with them so that we continue to, if we find opportunities for more training or other areas attending, other ways they can support, we continue to engage with them because we feel that they're providing a service. But they still continue to work, whether we're there regardless or not. And so what we find is like some cases that are not really, there may be just minor cases, the paralegals will resolve it and then they'll give us feedback on those cases that they resolve. And then if there are cases that are more in terms of probably heading towards the criminal, they will engage with us. So we work together. They will continue and then we'll link them up to our existing pro bono lawyers. So they will give them that support that's needed. So that's how for us also that we work with community-based paralegals. And we have a WhatsApp group where they all share cases and their challenges so they can continue to share experiences, continue to learn of each other. And so that's how we work with paralegals. In fact, we've been discussing, what we've recently done is assigned a couple of paralegals to become like coordinators of the paralegals. So assigning them to work with different clusters. So if you have LGAs in this particular cluster, now we have a lead coordinator paralegal that supervises what's going on, because we feel that we should build capacity. Like I think it's also what we were talking about the last time about ownership, getting them to feel more that this is really theirs and about what they do, and not to feel that it's always taking the lead. So they then can give us feedback on what's happening. And if they decide they want to hold trainings or anything, short mini trainings, even if it's through the WhatsApp group, they can they do that, just short little refresher trainings about anything that comes up. So that's the step that we've taken with our paralegals. And with them being coordinators, we've also been engaging with them that when in other projects, they come with us on monitoring visits. So again, it's for them to also share their experiences with new paralegals, to see what they're doing when they're carrying out sensitization in the communities, and to help them, if they see something they're not, because they've been down that road themselves before, so they can support them and say, like, this is where we saw that you need to, to fix this area or to do better or whatever.
For me, I think the question of ownership, who owns the case, has been very difficult for me to understand that question. Primarily because the way because I look at ownership of the process and who owns the case as two totally separate ideas. So when it comes to the question of who owns the case, I was struggling with it because my understanding of how we work with paralegals is this. The paralegals are in the community, they know the dynamics of the community, they know the corners, they know who's who, and they can have something solved within that context. Where we come in is that we have this, advantage of knowing the law, access to formal institutions. We have this knowledge, and we think that with our knowledge, partnering with the community knowledge, then we can give the best justice option or the best justice solution to the community themselves. So I look at us as equals in terms of who's bringing what to the case. So in terms of who owns the case, I think it's a co-ownership. Co-ownership in the sense, but it's a co-ownership with clear lines. It's a co-ownership with clear lines, because in Kenya we have this saying, like when you're going into the community and you're coming in too fast with all this knowledge, they tell you, come slow, come very slow. And that basically translates to take your time, you better know the community, you better know how this community works, then maybe at the appropriate time, tell us what you think the law says. So in terms of this co-ownership, then the community paralegals are the ones who are telling us sometimes, come slow. We know how this thing works. You have the knowledge, you know all this legal knowledge and all this legal jargon, but we're telling you, come slow, this is how it works. But sometimes we're the ones saying, come slow, because this is what the law says. And if we don't follow what the law says, then this is the pitfall ahead. For me, it's a co-ownership, and we cannot do without the other. That's why we're always trying, all these years, we're always trying to see how community strategies are at the center of our legal work, and how the legal work makes sense to the communities. And so I'll just end that thread of thought with this. In Kenya, there was a survey that was done. 95% of people don't use the formal institutions to seek justice. They rather go to the elders, they rather go to within the family or whoever is close to them. And here is a legal, we are building more courts by the day. We're building more courts for who? So this is where we realize both of us are valuable to each other. So for me, I wouldn't frame it as who owns the case, who brings what, and what's the best product we can in working together to give justice, to provide justice to the community. In the event, because we are both accountable to each other, we are both accountable to the community. In the event the community paralegal is unable to, then my assumption is that there is that respect, that professionalism, where the community paralegal says, I am going to do something else. I cannot handle this case. And then we are able now to work with other community paralegals. We don't only work with one paralegal the way I have seen it. It's a community. It's a community effort. So that's my contribution.
Andrew, I see you got your head up in the air. You're deep in thought. What are your thoughts? Because I see you have a lot going on there.
Yeah, I mean, the phrase co-ownership, I think, is very appropriate, and I certainly think that applies in our context as well. And I mean, just to sort of problematize it further, I think obviously the paralegals are not the end beneficiaries, but the clients, or which are either individuals or they are communities that are clients. And so I guess it's kind of more of a three-way co-ownership in that sense, rather than a two-way co-ownership. But again, I sort of think that this is like a little bit, I think it's often easier in theory than it is in practice. And I think in the practice of things get very complicated. And I think that there's I'm so adverse to sort of any kind of suggestion that there's like a right way, because I think there's infinite right ways, of course. And in addition to kind of that spectrum of how formal the relationship is between paralegals and paralegal support organizations, I think that there's also a spectrum of kind of who the community paralegals are and kind of their, I don't know, level of education or professionalism or otherwise. And there's just a tremendous difference, right, between even frankly, even in our own work, we have paralegals that didn't pass secondary school, like, but that are community activists, that are like leaders in their own way. And then we also have paralegals that have have businesses, like, are, I don't know, respected elders in their community and, you know, have had other opportunities. So there's quite a diversity, and I guess in that diversity, I think we are always one of the challenges that we face as a supporting organization is that everyone needs different things. Not only like do each of the clients need different things, but each of our paralegals need different things. So that's kind of one point. And then the other piece of it to me is that we, I think always in these conversations in like the legal empowerment space, there's often a lot of conflating, or maybe not conflating, but like lack of distinction between kind of who is being empowered kind of by legal empowerment. And we say like paralegals and we say communities, but sometimes we just talk about like them all as like one in a way if they're community paralegals. And I think that depending on who your paralegals are, and kind of what kinds of cases they're working on, you know, if the how do I put it? The type of case just matters so tremendously, because if the actor that is violating someone's rights is for instance the state, like the type of engagement and the level of support that paralegal is going to need is frankly tremendously greater than if it's a, I don't know, if it's like a landlord-tenant dispute, you know, about unpaid rent or about like the condition of the apartment or something like that. And so I think we just have to be forever very flexible in our approaches. And the last thing I'll say, and then I'll stop because I'm just rambling, but the last thing I'll say is I think in our own work, we're very keen to, I think there's always a tendency in civil society and legal empowerment work and whatnot, to kind of, I don't know how to say this right, but to kind of like float upwards, if that makes sense. Like, because it's always easier to work with people that are not as poor than the people that are more poor. And like, it's always easier to work with people that are poor rather than people that are very, very poor, and so on and so forth. And I think that that's true both at the level of paralegals and at the level of clients. And so I guess, you know, if we were, say, only interested in like numbers of cases and numbers of successes defined in that very kind of strict legalistic traditional way, then, you know, college educated, you know, paralegals working as staff of our organization, yada, 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 might be the model that we would choose, but that's not our goal, right? At least that's not the goal of JEI. And so, yeah, and so I guess, you know, going back to the question about who is being empowered, you know, as much as we want to empower communities, a big audience for our legal empowerment program is our community paralegals themselves. And that's why we have we are always training more paralegals, whether or not they become active in handling cases and working with JEI. They're important skills and knowledge that they've acquired along the way. Anyway, sorry, I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Andrew. So we've been discussing. I see we've got somebody that just joined us. We're talking about supervision, about paralegals, and how much beyond the training, when we're working with our paralegals and we're talking about like who owns the case. And Amy was saying that it's more about co-ownership between the paralegals and the civil society organization. And because the paralegal knows the community, while the NGO or the CSO knows the laws. So it's working together. It's more of a co-ownership. And Andrew then added on that it could be, it's a three-way. So I don't know, is that a tri-ownership? Because it's also the community the beneficiary of, you know, the service that's been provided to them. So it takes on a 3-dimension, and that no matter what, we're all accountable to the community in what we are trying to achieve. But that, yeah, even though there's a lot that is written down in theory, but it becomes much more complicated. And I don't know, I think whoever joined us just now would have heard what Andrew was saying, that even when we're working with paralegals, that we have different, we have a spectrum. So you have those that have no education, and then those that are educated, and then those that you're working with them, maybe they're staff, or those that are volunteers because they're based in the community, and it's more loose, it's more of a loose working relationship that one has. So that's basically it. So we're just really discussing, you know, maybe a question also to consider is, if we ask the paralegals themselves, would they consider themselves as being part? Do they feel like they're part of the whole process, or is it us talking about them? Maybe something that we need to one day consider, having them as part of our meetings to really hear what their own views are in terms of work. When we're working together, are we really working together? Are we working, instead of with them, we're working for them? Maybe those are questions that we should consider. So sometimes when we're working, as in any organization, when we're working together, there's always going to be tension. There's always going to be some sort of friction that happens. How do we deal with maybe emerging issues between ourselves and the paralegals? How do we resolve, you know, how does that affect our work, and how do we continue?
Amina, just before we proceed on to that point, there's something that Andrew said, that got me really thinking a lot. You know, this concept of empower. You know, we just loosely say that, oh, we're empowering. It does not take into account the agency of the community or the community-based paralegals themselves. So by the time we are coming and we're saying we're going to work together, we take into our minds that the community has agency. The community knows surely that this problem is wrong. Somebody doesn't have to come all the way from Lagos to tell me that what's going on is wrong. I have agency. I can do something within my space. But when we combine our forces is when now we're able to impact more and maybe get better results. In this concept of empower, and I'd like to share a personal experience I had. When I first started working with the communities, yes, I'm knowledgeable in the law, but I'm not knowledgeable in community, how to come in, you know, the small things of how you enter community and how you greet people. The first time I went to a community, I went straight into the business and I didn't say hello. And that was that was not taken very well according to the code of the community. So slowly by slowly, even as I was working as somebody supporting paralegals, I was empowered on how to speak and move in rhythm with the community. My knowledge, my legal knowledge is not applied in a vacuum. It's applied within a context that I need to be empowered on. So first, the concept of empower, the way we use it, we should be careful not to take away the agency from the community. And the concept of empowerment is not one way. We also get empowered as they too get empowered. On the other question of depending on the kind of paralegals we're working with, or you know, depending on level of education, depending on level of exposure, that's a fair point. But when it comes to ownership of a case, accountability on a case, professionalism of a case, these are not things you learn in a classroom. I can be there, I have not gone to maybe primary school, but I know what's right. But when I start something, I want it to be finished. And if I'm unable to finish it, then there are these levels of accountability and people that I can reach to. So I would invite us to look at this more broadly and not tie ourselves to education levels and things like this. There's already a rhythm and the way things are already been done in the community that doesn't need an education to validate or qualify what is already going on. Yeah.
And I think, Amy, that's a really very good point you just raised when you talked about, when we talk about empowering, we tend to think of what we are giving, but we forget that we also gain, we also learn in return too. And for somebody who maybe grew up in a city and then you have to work in a rural community, there's a whole lot going on that if you learn, and if you're open to it, you learn. And if you're not, you can end up messing up the whole relationship and not achieving what it is, the results that you're trying to get in the first place. And sometimes we also tend to go there with like, they're not educated, they don't know anything. But they do know, yes, you may not have had formal education, but there's so much one can learn from somebody who's not educated, because just because they haven't been to school doesn't mean they don't know anything. And they do know what is right from wrong. And yes, it's really important that we look at what we mean by empowering, and it should be that it is from all sides and not what we think we're taking there. And even when sometimes we're going there, we think we're taking something, may not even be what the community needs or what is even good for the community. If we had that, opened our minds to want to talk and hear back from them, because they do have agency as well. And it's true about accountability and professionalism. It's not being learned in the class. I was in fact sharing the other day, because I'm doing a course in university, and I'm so appalled by the lack of, maybe I'd call it professionalism. For us, we are all adults and we've taken ourselves to do this course, and what is going on, and it just makes you think. So, and this is the same attitude we take to our work as well, in terms of just being really unprofessional, in our studies, in our exams and everything. But I don't know if anybody wants to add on anything else.
Yeah, Amina, we've been joined by Shola is around, and also Ali Kaba is around, as well as Hafsa.
Yeah, would they like to introduce themselves?
Yes, I am around. Thank you.
Okay. Ali, can you introduce yourself and feel free to contribute, please?
Sure, I think I will do some listening, but my name is Ali Kaba. I'm from Nigeria, and I work on land-related issues in Nigeria for a little over 11 years, which included a collaboration with Namati and working with animators, which is kind of similar to Paralegal. And I'm currently doing my PhD at American University in Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Is there anything you want to add to what we've been discussing? I sort of missed what he was saying. It wasn't very clear.
Yes,
Sorry, I'm not. You guys did not get me?
There's a bit of interference on your sound.
Okay.
Yes, there's interference on your sound.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
But how is it now? Is it better?
No, it's like a muzzled frequency, muzzled radio frequency.
Okay, let me just kind of log out and then come back in. I don't know if that may help.
Okay.
Shola?
So hi everyone. It's a little bit tight of a schedule on my hand here, but this is one conversation I don't want to miss at all. So I had to connect, and good to see you, Amy, and everyone. So yes, and concerning ownership, co-ownership, I think let me just ask a question. What happens when the client actually withdraw its consent for the supporting NGO or the paralegal to handle his or her case? So I don't know whether we should also look at it from that angle. So because we are talking about co-ownership here, because from experience, I know that you need the consent of the client to really work on a particular case. And what if maybe along the line, the client says, okay, I don't want you to work on my case again, maybe as a result of one sentiment or the other, or one thing or the other. And just like Amy said, you know, to really understand the community is also very important, because some of these communities, they have ways of resolving disputes even before our paralegals are empowered to take up cases in the community. So that's just another area or another angle I want us to look at it from. If we're talking about co-ownership here, what happened when the clients suddenly come up and say, well, I want to withdraw my consent, I don't want you to continue handling it, maybe to the paralegal or the supporting NGO. So what do you think we can do at this point? So please.
Thank you. Does anybody want to respond?
Can I just test my mic? Is this better?
No, but we can hear you, but it still has that frequency sound, muzzled frequency sound. But we can.
Okay. Then I will just listen.
Okay, if you need to contribute anything, please feel free to put it in the chat as well.
Yeah, so Shona was asking a question that what happens when the client withdraws for any reason whatsoever while you have already started handling the case? And it does happen. We've all encountered that. So what happens? Would anybody?
Maybe I'll sort of further problematize that kind of question, because I think it's a good one, but sort of to add a layer, a piece of our work is also convincing people that justice is possible, right? It's also like convincing people to pursue justice. 10 out of 10 cases of domestic violence or SGBV that come into our work, invariably, very early on, the client or the client's parents or all of the above or the client's guardian say, I want to leave it to God, I'm not interested again. And I know this is very common, like it's not, and that reflects a system, a society, a legal system and so on that in which it's very hard to get justice in those kinds of cases. And there are lots of kind of cultural and societal pressures as well. And so I think there's an easy answer, like what happens if the client withdraws their consent, then you hands off the case. Like we need the client's consent. That's kind of very simple, like legalistic answer. But I think that there's, you know, given the specific example that I shared, and I think there are many that could fall into kind of that category or other categories. In my mind, I think all of us, and I'm not saying only us as the supporting NGO, but also us as paralegals, a piece of our work is about we tell our paralegals like paralegal work is about suspension of disbelief. It's about like literally believing and convincing other people to believe that something else is possible, because otherwise, like, you know, we're not, the point of this work is not to just resolve those, like, you know, run-of-the-mill cases where everyone is sort of just transacting. I mean, like, that's not the point of our work. Is to kind of challenge power imbalances, and to do that you have to have 1, tremendous courage, 2, tremendous capacity, 3, a whole network of people working together and supporters vertically, horizontally, upside down, and around in a circle, and all of the above. Otherwise you're not going to succeed, and all of that starts with the belief that something else is possible. If you don't get beyond that, right? If you can't convince a community that just you know, is being threatened with a forced eviction, that in fact, like, they have rights and they can prevail and that they should remain on their land or they should be beneficiaries of compensation, then there's no case to be had. If you can't convince, you know, a mother whose son was, you know, extrajudicially murdered by the police, that like that she deserves justice, then like you can't have, there's no justice to be had. And so I think that's a big piece of our work, is really about creating that space, creating that belief in alternatives.
Just to add on the so in Kenya in 2007, 2008, there was a post-election violence, and it was really bloody. It's the worst we've had in the country. And there was a lot of rape, murder, looting, forced displacement. So I was working with a group of victims of horrendous SGBV crimes. And it was through this experience that I knew justice means different things to different people. So I went in there knowing very well that we're going to challenge the system, that we're going to hold the police accountable, that we're going to hold the perpetrators accountable for the atrocities committed. They were horrible. Writing them, they were horrible. You know, this is stuff nightmares are made of. But when one survivor spoke up and said, for me, she was very articulate, and she said, for me, justice will be served when the man who raped me and I got his child out of this rape is able to support me to raise my child. That's what justice meant to her.
Okay.
So there was a conflict with what I'm trying to bring here on the table, as you know, this is what justice should be, and her interpretation of justice and her own reality of justice. Yeah. There was a woman whose son was murdered, but she said she forgave the murderers because they did it in a traditional setting where they came and they apologized, and that community came with the cows and everything. And I know this is not unique to Kenya, but at that point for her, that is what justice was. So even as we discuss about convincing the community to see, even as we try to convince the community to see what justice is, we should have the global understanding of what justice is for everybody in this co-ownership of ours. And then I agree with Andrew, when we are challenging a system and trying to convince the community that there can be change, and we need all this kind of support. And sometimes if the community is not on board, then you're stuck. It is at this point that I'm so grateful to the traditional law application. At least in our country, we have this legislation where you can go to court on behalf of somebody. You don't have to have locus. You don't have to be directly affected by the issue to take it forward. So if the community refuses, and I think in my former organization, there was such a case where a community had refused to go to court, and the organization went on the provision of locus standi. But in this case, justice was not being done in the interest of this specific community, but for the public good. So in such a case is when you have partnership with the legal system, this traditional law system, and we put progressive laws in place that anticipate communities pulling out and not wanting to be a part of the process, then in that case, I'm grateful for that approach.
And then I don't know, sometimes maybe there isn't, because that's nice when you can have recourse to what is the justice available in the community. What about if sometimes it's on a religious basis? So in terms of, let's say, child marriage, and a girl maybe is being forced into a marriage, and paralegals are working to convince the parents and to convince even the community themselves. And then you get the person, we're talking about people withdrawing from a case. Then you get the person withdrawing and say, no, they leave it to God. And the reason being maybe because her mother has said, if you continue with this case, I'm going to curse you. And religion has such a strong hold on people, especially in the rural communities, that if your parent says to you that they're going to curse you, you believe that once they curse you, that's it. It's over for you in your life, that nothing good is ever going to happen. And in the hereafter, you're going to be doomed. So how do we also resolve such things, when you have tried and tried, to convince those people that are involved? What happens there?
I mean, I'm so glad you brought that up. It just paints a very real picture of the work we're doing. A lot of the success stories we say is that, oh, went to your community, we educated them, they were empowered, and now there's been systems change. I find that not very often do we speak about these challenges, deep-seated religious or cultural beliefs that really stand in the way of justice, and that the community holds dear, the community that we want to work with to bring about justice. And for me, I don't really have a response, and maybe this is where I think the sector needs to have some deliberate thought on it. Maybe one of the solutions is, continuous education. Maybe there's no solution. I don't mean to sound like a doomsday prophet, but there's in some cases, I think, where continuous engagement, continuous working and using some strategies have bore some fruit. But I don't know if legal empowerment is one of the strategies that can really try and address these deep-seated cultural issues that we face. I don't know if we have the right strategies, to be honest.
Amy, can I follow on that? I have, how do I put this? Knowing the law is not legal empowerment. Like anyone that suggests that simply knowing the law or doesn't have a clue about what actually it takes to solve any of the problems that we're trying to face. And obviously all of us here know that very well, right? But just to reiterate, and this is why it's to go back to our prompt, right? We're talking about paralegal supervision, and I think a piece of the puzzle that how do I put it? The number of different strategies and tools and actors that need to be brought to the table to resolve meaningful cases, challenging cases, community-wide cases. One is far beyond just knowledge. It's knowledge and capacity and opportunity and money and time and all these other things that that support from your family that are required. And so in a way, I find it just unrealistic to think that, how do I put it? Unrealistic to say that that it's about, I don't know, that it's about just knowledge. It's not just about knowledge, but but the role
Looks like he's frozen. He'll be back.
Yeah.
There's somebody, maybe while we are waiting for Andrew, want to add on anything? We've been talking about
what I'm trying to say, but will change in our work.
Andrew, we missed the last section that you were talking about because of internet connection. So if you could please repeat what you were saying.
Sorry. I was trying to land on my feet. I was trying to say that to bring us back to kind of the topic that we're discussing, which is paralegal supervision, and kind of problematizing that term as one that suggests kind of certain power imbalances, perhaps. I think that in a way it is perhaps a clumsy term to refer to what I think many of us do, which is a very multifaceted paralegal support, but I don't know. We need like better words to describe how it happens.
Yeah.
But you know, our legal team, Shola, who's on this, he's an essential piece of resolving so many cases in Port Harcourt, supporting our paralegals to resolve so many cases in Port Harcourt. And that's not only because he went to law school. That's a piece of it, but like there are lots of other pieces of it as well. And so I think maybe we need to like think about a new language around to better describe what we do and the relationships that we have.
Yeah.
I just to interject and say I agree completely.
Yeah. Because when we say supervision, it does really sound the top down. You have somebody at the bottom and you have control over what happens. Whereas when we were speaking earlier about co-ownership, it's about all of us together working on issues that are prevalent in our communities. So how much of that maybe for I think, I don't know, did Ali say he was with an NGO, or did he say he was a professor or something?
No, are you guys hearing me now? It's still not working, huh?
No, we can hear you, but just proceed. It's fine.
Still muzzling. It's still muzzling. Well, let me comment through a text. Then I would comment I would send a text through the chat.
But I think we can hear you, though.
Oh, you can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess you're asking my background, and I had introduced myself before that I am from Liberia, and I been working on land-related issues and helping communities to develop their own capacity and agency to address internal community dynamics. But I do reason with the challenge that's being presented here. Are we an instrument to get justice, or are we just creating the avenue for communities, members of communities to seek justice on their own? I think that is one of the major challenges that we face in our work in Liberia. It is a difficult problem to resolve because part of it is information. I think that creates it's a sense of power imbalance. There's some people that have more information than others, and then there's another problem of whether do we go for collective sense of justice. I think somebody said that people internalize their own cultural norm of justice, and within their context, it may have worked, but society is changing, communities are changing, therefore the different problems now cannot be resolved by the traditional mode of seeking justice. I think that's why some of us are engaged in this work. And communities are dealing with external actors that may not share their value, but they may have more power, they may have money, they may have information, and therefore they may not be prepared to negotiate their interest with those communities. Whether that is a foreign investor from outside or like NGOs like us, because we are coming with different values within these communities, and there's a power dynamics in that. As difficult as it is, I just take comfort in the fact that you must always retrospect on your role in the community. You must be transparent with what you bring on the table. You must be aware of your own power within a dynamic, and yeah, I don't think there's any easy way out of this, to be quite honest with you. But these type of conversations, they're important for people that work in communities to continue to retrospect on what role they play and how they can enable communities to ultimately seek justice for themselves, or committee members to seek justice for themselves. Otherwise, I don't think you can transplant something from outside and assume that that will work without affecting some of the social cohesion within communities that are also necessary for communities to thrive, because that what makes them a community. Otherwise, we all will be the same, right? So those are things, as we continue to talk, we continue to reflect, share knowledge, we'll be able to enter communities with a sense of purpose and some difference to what the communities may bring, within the partnership. I don't know if I'm clear.
Yeah.
I know that the voice
Yeah.
this stuff is not working.
No, it's I think I heard you clearly. I don't know Amy and everybody else. I think I'm not sure, but I heard what you were saying. You mentioned that societies and communities are changing, and that we should be transparent in the work that we're doing and take into consideration that they have their own context, and we shouldn't try to change that, because otherwise we can end up destabilizing the communities. So we end up, instead of doing good, we do more harm than good to those communities. And ultimately, we want communities to be able to access justice for themselves. And I guess that is what it means by being empowered or being enabled. In fact, there are some that say empower. When you talk about empowerment, it has a power dynamic to it. There's somebody who has control of something to give it to somebody else. And maybe we should be looking at even another word and not using the word empowerment. So anyways, there's a lot there going on.
Yeah, even as we speak about terminologies that really influence how we work, I agree. I mean, I'm along the lines of the term supervision. So I remember during one of the first conversations we had, I was doing some background research on, this is a model paralegal program. And so I went to see how they do paralegal supervision. And how they do paralegal supervision, in which, because this is an honest and open conversation, I wasn't very comfortable with the way they said part of supervision is to go and announce to the community centers to see if the paralegals are doing their work. First of all, to me, are we in a plantation picking cotton or maize where the master has to come and see whether we're doing the work or not?
No.
These are our partners. These are people with agency. We are co-owning the case. You can't just happen on someone to supervise, because what that means is you think you're in a higher, more powerful position for you to be able to do that. In terms of shaping how we work with the paralegals, and this definition of supervision was very problematic for me, and it really left a bitter taste in my mouth. So I'm very happy for us to consider what, maybe it doesn't mean changing supervision, but for us to give meaning to the word supervision within our context, or we could get another term, bearing in mind that all of us involved are bringing to the table that is seeking justice.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's, it's either we define what we mean by supervision or find another word that is more all round, more encompassing, showing ownership going on between us, and not plantation style kind of word. So when we talk about, when we're talking about ownership and supervision, what's really, apart from us, seeing what paralegals like, what really is ownership? When we talk about co-ownership, what is that? What happens when we say, okay, this is a co-ownership between us paralegals and then the community as well? So what does that mean? How do we reflect that in our work? Or if we don't, then maybe this will give us all ideas in terms of thinking again how we carry out our work with paralegals. What does that mean? sort of, what do we do together?
I think that's a great question. Can I describe what our paralegal supervision meetings look like? And they are far from perfect. I'll be the first to admit that. But so our paralegals are all divided up into different groups because there's so many of them that you can't all meet at the same time and have a productive meeting. But and so Amina, this is all news for you because you've been part of our meetings before. But paralegals meet and then one by one stand up in front of everyone else, and everyone else includes all of the other paralegals in their group, and one of our staff attorneys, typically, sometimes a lead paralegal if a staff attorney is not available, and basically gives like updates on the cases they're working on. They literally stand in the front, like almost at like a podium. They have their case files and they say like, this is what I've done. And all of the other paralegals in the room, like, you know, ask questions or give ideas or you know, or if my daughter's at the office too, she can join, or if they are having a challenge, they ask a question, and like, you know, so then the house, you know, everyone else that has you know, handled a similar case can give guidance, but my colleague Shola would have explained in his own words if he were still here, but his role is really to like answer legal questions when legal questions come up, or like and frankly to help with like documentation. Like, you know, we take on the very frankly unsexy work of like trying to like record all these details into our case database because it's important for us to like, for reporting and for being able to follow up with paralegals and being able to like, you know, diligently provide the support that they need. So that's what it looks like. And in those spaces, like, other paralegals criticize each other or support each other or otherwise, you know, often they're very rowdy. Like, they're like these big kind of like, you know, everyone, you know, trying to figure out how to solve challenging cases. Yeah, so anyway, I guess that's a bit of what they look like. You know, often they're meetings that last 6 hours because a single paralegal might be giving updates on, you know, 5 or 10 cases they're working on that have updates, or not. And, you know, some weeks they're not very long because for whatever reason, there aren't very many updates. So that's a bit of a snapshot. I don't know if that's a very clear picture. And again, I'm sure it can be a lot more effective. We can be a lot more effective in this work than we are. But that's kind of our current practice.
Yeah.
Can I jump in a little?
Yes,
hello?
Please do.
Yeah.
Yes, Ali.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Andrew. I think your presentation on this was very helpful. So I think it is difficult to avoid this power relationship and in respect to ownership. I guess what sometimes has been challenging for us is by the fact that you have a paralegal, I would assume that they do benefit for some training from you. So we provide them training. So we are actually empowering them. So that creates that power dynamics between them and the communities that they're supposed to work with. So at that level, I would think that there is a relationship between those that are training the paralegals and the paralegals. That's a difficult different relationship. It can be technical relationship, but I also think there's a moral duty to make sure that the information and knowledge and technical skills that you're giving these people, they don't leverage it for their own advantage or leverage it to disempower other people. I think there's that relationship there. Then the practical working of the paralegal, which is between the communities and the paralegals, I think there's a different dynamics of relationship. And I think that area needs a little more understanding about how paralegals can be held accountable by the community. And for us, I think what we did is we made sure that the community set up their own rules about how to manage paralegals, what paralegals were allowed to do, what how to hold paralegals accountable, and how to replace paralegal if they're not operating good. So that's a different aspect of it between the communities. So I think there may be multiple avenues to this, but I think the fact that you as an external actor have entered the communities, you've created you've created an imbalance into this system, and you are providing one side with more information than the other side. So I think you have both the technical responsibility to make sure they're doing the right thing, but I think there's also a moral aspect of this to make sure the knowledge that you're impacting is not used in a way to disempower other people within the community.
Absolutely. I mean, I have like one specific reflection on what you've just shared, and then I also have an aspirational answer to Amy's question. That's aspirational because we didn't actually put it fully into practice. We in our organization have a very no exceptions strict policy about corruption. There's literally no money that changes hands. There's no money that ever enters paralegals' hands for anything. Vis-a-vis clients, no call cards, no transportation, no anything. And we have a very strict policy because anything less than a strict policy feels like a slippery slope, and it's kind of hard to define parameters, and we work otherwise within a system that is highly corrupt, where you pay for justice, both informal and in informal justice kind of spaces, and there have been 2-3 instances over the last over the last 6-7 years where clients have come back and reported that paralegals that work with us demanded money of some kind from them, and those paralegals were suspended, as in, or we disassociated with them, like they no longer work with JAI as paralegals. So that's like, and I share that kind of both to kind of ground the conversation about like ownership and authority and power dynamics, because in that instance, JAI as an organization that is supporting paralegals and so on, basically took the step to distance ourselves from certain individuals that we had trained as paralegals. So that's kind of a practical example. In terms of being accountable to communities, Amy, responsive to your question, very early on in our work, we tried to set up kind of like community oversight committees that basically like nominate prospective paralegals from their communities to participate in paralegal training, and then kind of have a role in understanding what that paralegal is doing and their casework and whatnot. so that the paralegal is literally accountable to a specific structure in the community. I think it's still probably a good idea. I say it's a bit aspirational because as our work grew so much, like the organizing capacity to set up those kinds of structures in every community. We work with hundreds of communities. Just was beyond our capacity. We just couldn't do it. But probably it'd be a good idea to go back to something like that and like reinvigorate it and put some more energy into it, because I think it's useful. Obviously very sensitive to your comparison of like cotton picking plantations. I mean, that's certainly not something that any of us want to be associated with. And I think it actually is a very like fine line in many ways. Like I think all of us have to be very careful about all of our work to make sure that we're not crossing lines in that sense.
But I'm curious. Sorry, Amina.
No, I was just going to say that, do we maybe, because we were just talking about resources, especially finance, and yes, it's true, because we are accountable to those who give us those finances to make sure that we report back properly. But maybe do we consider them when we're maybe writing proposals or developing budgets? Like, let's say, for instance, an example could be sensitization in the communities, because like ours, it's the paralegals that go and do the sensitization in the communities. Do we maybe consult them as to maybe what the cost implications are in terms of, let's say, transport? Because sometimes you're not familiar with the communities where you're living and where they're living, and they probably have hard to reach areas. So they end up, what you're thinking it will cost may cost much more. Do we involve them, and maybe in budgeting, or even in terms of, we did that before, which we found was very useful in a project, where we involved them in the planning process. So not in the budgeting, but in the planning process. And their insights into, at that time, like some of these places were hard to reach and it was the rainy season approaching. We will definitely not be able to reach them because they don't have roads that be swamped by the rivers. And that really helped us in planning which communities to go to first, and then which community, and those communities that would be unreachable because of the rains, we would go to them after the rains were over. If not for that insight from the paralegals, we had already done a plan one way, and we had to change it all because of the feedback we got from them. So I don't know, I guess that would be a kind of like ownership, bringing them on board, because they also were involved in the planning part of it. But in terms of maybe the budgeting aspects, I don't know if we tend to consult with them, because they live in the communities and know how far these places are. So how much really would be appropriate to budget?
I agree in terms of including the paralegals in the budgeting process, but also deriving from my personal experience working with paralegals here in the country. So there's been this rift between national organizations and community-based, paralegal work, people who are in the community. They say, and this is a narrative that is happening in the country right now, that national-based NGOs use grassroots NGOs to get money from the donors, yet they don't know what's happening at grassroots level. I'm sure that's not a conversation that's just unique to Kenya. So trying to be sensitive to the fact that we are not, national NGOs, you don't want to seem to be using the grassroots to get funding. We can include them meaningfully in the budgeting process, and not just to ask their opinion on their, specific activity as well. And this is something I've been thinking about: how open and how far are people involved in the budgeting process? Because remember, we said this is a co-ownership. We even said, no, now we are co-owners, now we are partners, now we are. So when it comes to budgeting, are we still, or we hide some certain aspects of the budget away from the paralegals? Me, I'm just saying what has been in practice. So
yeah, Amy, I mean, like, let's take it another level, like, in two ways. One, it's not only like local organizations versus like national organizations, but local organizations, national organizations versus international organizations, right? I mean, like, that's like, and that's a narrative that's been around since like before all of us were born. And I think there have been wonderful and dramatic shifts away from international organizations based in the global north, you know, running and supporting programming in the global south. And I think that's something that all of us can celebrate, because that's really problematic in a lot of ways. That's one. But two, like, and I would be happy to share Shola can also share very challenging experiences we've had in Nigeria, trying to be very open. And frankly, it's not just about budgeting, right? So we equally support a number of social movements, from which paralegals get nominated and trained by paralegal by JI, and then carry out paralegal work. And a lot of the grants that we get to support their work are grants that we co-sign, as in, like, it's not just like asking about like how much is transportation, but like literally, like, the grant agreement has them as a party and they sign the grant agreement, right? So like, that is really hard. And like, I will be honest, we do not do that across board. Like, there are some grants that we do that where it's like a very open and very fluid and I think very powerful and positive experience. However, it's often also very challenging, and like, in important ways, yes, but also in very challenging ways. And I'm not saying because like I'm hiding like how much like money I make as my salary, or so. Like, challenging in other ways that are more about like political dynamics and like, you know. So here's one of the challenges, right? If you have a contract, you need parties, because law is so damn conservative. Like, the parties to the contract have to be legal entities. So like, who is going to sign on behalf of the communities and the paralegals, right? They're going to go and register themselves as a cooperative, or it's like deeply political. And so it's important, but like, it wades into a sea of complexities that can be really challenging. And as Shola could explain as well, we've had there's so much tension in our work because of this, and I think it's a good tension. It keeps us honest. Sometimes it keeps us more than honest, though, and like, it makes us a little bit banging our heads against the walls. But anyway, I think it's something important to do. Yeah, really hard.
Ali, Shola, any additions based on what Andrew said in terms of paralegals? Because donors, when we're talking about budgeting and finances, how much we can, how really can we involve paralegals in the financing aspect? And the fact that donors are getting more and more strict in terms of the reporting and what they want to see. And a lot of, at least from our point of view, with the paralegals that we work with, even with the bit that we do with them, we always find it a challenge in terms of getting the proper the documents for financial reporting. And it's always been a tug of war, and they don't see it. They just think you need these receipts and everything. Can you hear me, or have I gone off? internet looking like I'm unstable. And they don't really get it that we need these, we're not trying to be difficult, is that we really do need these documentation for reporting back to donors. And a lot of it is because they don't have financial literacy skills. Some of them haven't even done primary school. Those are the kind of paralegals that we work with. So really, how do we, is that involved, is that, and Andrew just shared how it's really not doable, or it's not really possible to share everything.
Well, it is doable, but it's really hard. Like, look, I attend meetings where people hold up, you know, a printout of like a grant agreement saying that that we got $70,000 to do X, Y, and Z, and they tell the community members, "This is your money. This is your money. Ask them what they did with your money," and like, look, that's good. Like, it's really good, but man, it makes my work hell. It makes my work so hard, because then and it's not because anything was hidden along the way, because like the reason why they have those documents to then go to the community and, you know, say that like this is that we were very transparent about it, but
they don't realize that there's so much in that budget that doesn't involve them. All they're just thinking is that this whole 70 goes towards them.
Well, it's also challenging to like, you know, if it were just at my level, like, you know, I don't know, it's really hard. Like, I have to then, you know, because like the whole grant system is a system that is built on like people playing hide the ball, right? Like because like this grant for which there are activities was written 2 years ago and was approved by a donor like 16 months ago. And then like, maybe those things aren't as relevant anymore. And like, maybe we should go back through like the complicated process of like getting a grant, but like the whole system is not set up for that. And so like, yes, it's the right thing to do. Yes, we try our best to do it. But like everyone else in this system, like the donors, like everyone, like also has to be doing it too. And they're not largely doing it.
Yeah.
And so like we get like in this weird like squeezed in the middle thing where like we gotta like face the donors and give them what they're asking for, but like we also have to do what we believe to be ethically right vis-a-vis our paralegals and the communities we work with. And like, yeah, there's not often very many those two circles don't often intersect. Often there's a fairly large gap between them, and that's one of the challenges of our work.
But you do realize then that the imbalance persists, because he who holds the money holds the power. And yet we are trying, and we're trying in other ways to show that this is a co-ownership, we're in this together. But when it comes to, you know, the meat and the potatoes, the money, I'm not saying that's the only meat and potatoes, but money is significant. Then we're facing challenges in co-ownership. To me, and I don't want to oversimplify the issue, then it's a replication of what the international community does to the national organizations. And this behavior is replicated and it's devolved to how national organizations relate with community work. I do not know what the solution is. Andrew, I understand it's very difficult. For example, you take the communities to a hotel venue, they stay for training, and they say, instead of using money, this money on this training, give us the money, you know. Those are difficult conversations, yeah. Instead of giving me $5 for transport, I do not want to sleep in this hotel, I do not want to eat this expensive food, give me all that money I put in my pocket, and then we will meet where we meet. You know, they have their own ideas about how the money should be used. In a way it's healthy, in a way it makes your work very difficult. I have no solution. I don't know. Even me,
you know, just I don't know. I'm just thinking of what you just said, Amy. I sometimes think that, you know, maybe we are also very rigid in terms of how, like in this particular scenario that you just shared, Because when we look at, like, for instance, in our context here now, where times are really hard for people, maybe since you've already budgeted that this is exactly what you're going to spend on each individual, maybe the donor should be flexible enough to say, yeah, okay, give it to them and let them sign it out that they've received it, or you have sent it into their accounts, and then it's up to them to decide that they want to stay in the hotel or they want to maybe a cheaper hotel, because they're thinking all this money being sent, and that's sometimes that's the feedback that that we get. I could have used it to maybe pay my daughter's school fees or my children's school fees. I could have, you know, so I don't know. I mean, I guess there's an ethical dimension to it as well. I don't know. But maybe sometimes we just have to start looking around, you know, to see how, in terms of being a bit more flexible.
I mean, to turn it on its head, and sorry I keep interjecting, but I think that ultimately, whoever it is that are the quote unquote rights holders or beneficiaries, or whichever awful word that you use to describe the people that you're trying to serve or work with,
Yeah.
and should have control of the reins of funding. So, for instance, like, if they think that I, Andrew Mackey, am worth like X to them, like, that's what my salary should be. And I think that that's the kind of like radical, transformative, putting the hands in the power of the people that should exist. I think that we're collectively a long ways away from that, because I don't think that that's how, like, you know, this system has been built to be.
Yeah, this is a tough conversation, but I do remember we had a tough experiment in which we asked ourselves within our local NGO, if you were to develop a project, assuming there is unlimited funding, how will you develop such a project? And it was a very interesting exercise. You know, one of the most profound exercises that I have actually participated in. Ultimately, I think we've captured this relationship between national and international organizations. The reality is that our work is not to engage in direct material development, in that we're not building schools, we're not building wells, we are engaged in social transformation, so changing behavior, you know, which then comes with values. So the project themselves, I build with their own internal values and what have you, which may not be directly linked to the community's material interest. So you anticipating something that transformation will happen long down in the future, and some community members are looking at their current state, and their expectations may be different. They expect something that will be materially valuable to them. So there are just too many things getting into this. As you try to unravel it, you see that it is a very difficult exercise, and at yeah, I'm trying to guide how I talk about this, because yeah, it is question of ethic. This, you know, question of value, you know, where value is brought with projects. You know, do you develop project from the bottom up, or is there some funding and you tap into based on your project, or there's already there's an expectations from the funding that you need to then fit your project into. Those are all questions. I think those are questions between local NGOs and international NGOs, and I really do believe that gradually the conversation is growing, and I think we all need to participate in that conversation about how these projects are crafted and fundings are allocated. So I think that's one aspect of the debate. Then the other aspect is what is the expectation of local communities towards local NGOs, both in respect to let me reflect on this a little bit. I think this is something that needs more reflection, but I think it's a conversation that should be held. I think Andrew mentioned that this is a positive tension, and I really appreciate that this conversation has been held. I think most local NGOs are having this conversation, so it is not well, at least it's not new to the organization I work with. We're always having this conversation. But the solution is where the tricky part is. There's a limited funding. There's value behind these fundings. There are ideas behind these fundings. And then you have to package projects to fit how the values and ideas are structured around the funds. Then that next layer is now that knowing that, as those of us that we think that we are now empowered, talking about empowerment again, we think we are in a position to have this type of conversation directly with the donor. Yeah, it's to do more reflection on this. I don't think we can find a solution here, but I think it's a continued conversation, and I think it's necessary. Yeah.
Okay. I think we've had a very interesting session. We've talked about supervision, ownership, transparency, and the need for more conversations around how we create ownership, to have a real participatory, looking at the word ownership, looking at the word empowering, and also in terms of still being accountable to those that we maybe get funding from, and still being accountable to the communities that we work in, and at the same time ensuring that we're still making access, justice accessible to those communities. That's the whole reason why we're doing this work. I think for me, I've learned quite a lot today, and I have an idea that I'll be sharing with you, Amy and Andrew, over the, we talked about a summit coming up. And there was something that came up that I thought maybe that's a conversation that we need to also hold during that summit. If there's nothing else to add, I think we can call it a day. I don't know, any last words from anybody? 30 seconds.
Yes, I must admit today was quite an interesting conversation. It really talks to the challenges of running a paralegal program, just beyond the content of how we deliver the content, but the runnings of a paralegal, and it also questions our values as national organizations of paralegal supports NGOs. I think we should continue having more of these honest conversations. And one thing that Ali had mentioned, and I hope we don't lose track of it, is this tension between the local grassroots organizations and national organizations. I think we should have a discussion about it. Not that we are coming to, complain, but this is a tension that exists. If the donors were able to take criticism from us, then we should also be able to take criticism and try and mend whatever it is in our ways that is not gelling with the community. So I think it's a conversation we should have, and I agree with you, Amina, that it could be expanded to include grassroots communities. We can't talk about ourselves for ourselves by ourselves. It's hardly an honest conversation. So I think we should expand this, of course, strategically with grassroots communities and see how that conversation can take place.
Andrew, final last words?
I think I've probably said more than my fair share, but I appreciate having this space. Thanks everyone for coming and sharing, and I think it's been an interesting conversation, to say the least.
Thank you. Shola?
Yeah,
Anything you want to say?
Yeah, it's like I said, it's one conversation I don't want to miss. It's really interesting, particularly the conversation around budget spending. So it's interesting. On my own part, I think accountability and transparency is key. If we agree that ownership is ownership is jointly owned, if we agree that it's jointly owned, then of course discussion as regard budget, resources, control should also be, at least we need to also carry everyone in the system along also. So to me, I look forward to another exciting discussion. So it's really an interesting time. Thanks everyone.
Maybe next conversation should be with the paralegals as well, to hear from them. Mutanu, is she there?
Yes, I am. You actually just said what I wanted to say, but it will be nice to hear from a paralegal, or to hear the voice of a paralegal, because I have the feeling that we are talking as people who support the paralegals, who train them, who give them the cases, but it will be nice to actually hear a paralegal's point of view. I think it will enrich the discussion.
Ali?
No, thank you so much. I really appreciate you including me in this. Thank you.
Thank you. Hafsa? Hafsa? Okay, maybe she's not there. But so thank you everybody for this. It was really enlightening, and it was a very interesting conversation that led from one thing to another. Like I said earlier on, I learned a lot, and look forward to the next session that we have on this discussion. So I think we can call it a day. Thank you all. Bye. Oh, we didn't even take a picture.
Thanks.